tender age of 74, this is shameful, I lost my cannabis virginity. Growing up, I never thought very much about cannabis. We called it pot. And, alcohol and speed were doing the job for me. So, why worry? And that worked for me for a long time until it didn't. And then after I got sober, well, drugs were off the table, so, But I live here in the valley, a happy valley, and so I know a few things about pot. I know that it is legal in Massachusetts. I know that Northampton seems to have more dispensaries than fast food outlets. And I know that like cholesterol, with that letter thing, like cholesterol, there's a good pot, or CDC, and a bad pot, or I think it's TNT. It's something like that. Anyway, towards the end of the pandemic, I was stricken by sciatic pain, and oh my God, every step I took sent flames shooting up my leg, and I live alone and I have a dog and I wasn't managing very well. So I called a doctor, and doctors at that time were booking like 6 months to a year out. I tried alternative practitioners, and if they hadn't closed during the pandemic, they weren't taking new clients or patients. And then I tried every single remedy that I could find over the counter, and nothing worked. And during this whole time, people are coming up to me and saying, Susan, medical marijuana is used for pain management. And I would say, oh, no, I'm not that desperate yet. Okay, until I was. So one Sunday I found myself outside of the Netta dispensary down on Pleasant Street. And this is a big place. It's kind of like a spaceship. And all the people standing in line, ahead of me sounded like aliens to me, because they were talking about, debating the merits of, I don't know, like orange cushion, something like that, and then purple monkey balls, and then, something like Alaskan clusterfuck. And I had no idea what was going on. So I didn't have time to rethink my decision because I was up next, and the security guard let me into this airlock entry chamber, that's long and narrow, and you go in one at a time. And then at the end of this, behind reinforced glass, there sat a woman who said to me, "Identify yourself." I did, and proved it. And then she buzzed me into the main chamber, which was huge. I mean, it was huge. There were counters to the right, there were counters to the left, and right in front of me was this little drug security guard, or crossing guard, I don't know. And he says to me, "Medicinal or recreational?" And I said, "Oh, duh, medicinal." And he asked to see my card. So I whipped out my pandemic card, and I showed him that I was not only vaccinated, but I was boosted. I was too. And so he looked at that card, and he looked at me, and he said, recreational. Nothing worked. So I'm hobbling over to the recreational counter, an empty counter, and this nice young man says to me, what can I give you? And I said, I want one of those edible thingies. And he looks at me and he points at a binder that's that thick and says, these are our edibles. And I said, oh, what kinds do you have? And so he starts listing them off, and I stopped him at gummies, because I knew gummies. You know, kids took gummies as vitamins, you know, so how bad could they be? So I said, gummies. And then he said, what kind? And I'm thinking, huh? What? Do you mean like bears or worms or... And he's going, no, I mean, what kind of cannabis and what strength do you need? What do you need it for? And what kind do you want? And I said, oh, I want the good kind, thinking of the CDC. And I said, oh, I want the good kind, and I'm feeling such pain, I want relief from pain. So he says, okay, good stuff, feel no pain. He says, I have just the thing for you. And so we finished up, and I went home, and I tore open the bag, and I popped one of those suckers. And I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. And I'm waiting, and nothing's happening. So I think maybe it's like Tylenol. You have to take 2 of them. So I'm just about to do this when, boing! You know what happened? Aliens came down and abducted my body. And they left my expanded consciousness stranded on that couch like a beached whale. Oh my God. And I'm thinking, I was so shocked, I'm thinking, well, do I feel relief? No, I didn't feel relief, because it was just awful. Every heartbeat, that pain expanded into the consciousness and then contracted. And it was like having a migraine, if you've ever had a migraine of the right butt cheek, you know? So I panicked. It was just awful. And I panicked, and I called my neighbor, Karen, and I said, Karen, you've got to help me. I took one of those gummy thingies. And she said, a whole one? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, Joe always slices them up. And I said, well, whatever, can you make me some strong coffee so I can get out of it? And she said, oh, no, Susan, pot doesn't work that way. I said, what do you mean? She goes, you just have to wait it out till it wears off. Oh, God. So I sat there for hours, expanding and contracting, expanding and contracting. Till it finally wore off, and I threw the gummies out. So, as a footnote, a chiropractor finally took mercy on me and helped me with the sciatic pain. But that is the story of how I lost my cannabis virginity.